1400 years ere seed sown, truth was twisted, its seeds were grown. Break the lies, spark the mission. Welcome to Quranic Inquisition.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Peace of the Lord to all of you. Shalom, assalamu alaikum, namaste, and welcome back to the channel. We are back to talk about the Quran once again, new finds and new interesting bits that we wanted to bring to your attention. With us, as always, Kash. Hello, Kash. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well as always. How are you, JC?
I'm very well. First, let me actually just mention to people when they join that we have an outro, but this time we are actually testing new things. So when you're actually watching the stream, make sure that you actually get to the end, have a look at the outro, and let us know your thoughts in the comment section so that we know if we have to change it, if you like it, if you don't, and those sort of things. Also, for the first time ever, we are trying to stream on two platforms at once. So we are meant to be on YouTube and also X. And hopefully next time we'll do Rumble as well once I have figured that out. So make sure if you are actually around that you click on like and subscribe and all of those YouTube things because it really helps us a lot. And that's pretty much it from me. Now over to you, Cash. What are we going to be talking about today?
Today we are going to be talking about this. It's a continuation from the when we were talking about the cradle. So we had a discussion about the cradle, and we saw some interesting things, that being about the whole Mahdi word, which is translated as cradle. We suggested it might mean something like the one who returns, or like the returner, something like this. The traditional rendering was always rightly guided one, something like that, but it was quite unspecific. They didn't quite know in the sources of Tabari and such. Anyway, point being is that we then had this other word in conjunction with the Mahdi, which we presented as being potentially willing or desired, chosen one, something like this maybe. Um, that said, we also looked at the potentiality from the Ethiopic, that being for baptism or immersion. And that's when we were looking at this sabaya word. So in this situation, the root appears fairly confidently to include the y as well, where then the way I would read this is looking at it as the SBY root, sadeba y root, with the suffix definite article that wasn't rendered over. That's the way I see it. But anyway, point being is we looked at this, and in the context of Surah 19, we see the word twice. So we see the word occurring in the context of John once, and then in the context of Jesus once. The one we're looking at here is in the context of Jesus, where it says, how we speak, who is in the cradle a child, according to the standard translation. And so this word is both times translated as child. And we were looking at the potentiality here of it referring to baptism, given how this is a narrative discussing John the Baptist and Jesus, who, was also an infamous or famous for baptism, of course. So these are words that we would expect in the story that is focusing and elevating John. We call him John the Baptist for a good reason, right? And that isn't invented in the English language. This goes back, of course, to day one. So potentially it was something about the wisdom of baptism. That's what I put forward here as a potential reading. Um, that said, we also looked at this other one, which would mean more, it would be more, let's say, unique, right? It could mean baptism, I suppose, based on its context, but this Ethiopic root, which we found very interesting, the Sabaya root in the Ethiopic, actually means to spill over or to overflow, right? Like imagine the imagery of Christ's, the water from Christ, which overflows, right? So that's what we had for context. So that's the question today, is this idea of Sabians. And I visualized it here with the stars, because they were supposedly star worshippers. Yeah, JC?
Kash, yes, before we actually get to this part of the presentation, I wanted to give a little bit of context of what happened with those previous two verses. So if you put the mind actually rolling back to the ones where we see, yes, here, that would be perfect. So from the beginning, Kash and I, we realized that the Quran needed to have some words that they just had to be there, because if it's talking about Jesus as the Messiah, and then we kept finding him more and more, and also the Spirit and so on. So the book is very Trinitarian. So we knew that there are some words that have to be in the Quran, but they apparently weren't. And one of them was baptism. There were many others, like crucifixion. We would expect to find that again and again, resurrection, these sort of things. And we are now finding them, including resurrection, and we'll talk about those things in the future. There are lots of words that they were hidden, and baptism was meant to be one of those. It had to be there, but we just didn't say it until we were having a conversation with Hakan Joe on his channel, and he mentioned, "Oh, well, look at this," and that triggered us to actually go and look at the actual root. And we were surprised to see that this particular entry, that it is translated as a child in the case of John and also in the case of Jesus. Both of them in Surah 19, Surah Miriam, and this word happens to appear exactly in the place where you would expect it to see. You wouldn't expect to find this word when talking about Moses or anything like that. But Christians, particularly, they would never call John John. They always call him John the Baptizer. It's always qualified. So if baptism was to appear anywhere, it would certainly have to be near John. And there it is. And the second one, Jesus. Okay, it would make a lot of sense as well for that word to be with with John and with Jesus. And also, after saying last time that the word cradle that appears just before this root that we are analyzing today happens to most likely not be cradle and being about returning, or the returning one, or something of the sort. Now we start to see that, okay, yes, the Quran is very Trinitarian, it's talking about Jesus a lot and about the Spirit and so on, and words that we were expecting to see, they were there to begin with, but then they were hidden. And I think this one is a very obvious one to see, because it happens to be attached to John and attached to Jesus, exactly what you would expect them to see. And that's pretty much just my 2 pence. And Kash, now you can actually go through all of the other stuff. Just I wanted to give a little bit of the background of how we struggled in the beginning and how confused we were when we couldn't find baptism when it was right there staring us in the face.
Yeah, well, this SB root appears in different forms. It's something to pay note of. Basically, when we see the Sade Ba Gain root, that's the one that they translate in the Quran basically as dying, or like immersion. Because in the old context, you would, let's say, dye your clothing by dipping them in water. So that's where the root comes from. So that takes on this meaning of dyeing and so forth. And you see it in the Saba Ain in the Arabic, in the Quranic Arabic. Um, but it doesn't phonetically make sense. So basically, I assume essentially that this comes from the Saba Ain, which is very, very common across Semitic languages to mean baptism, right? And then you just put a dot and make up a new word, which then becomes the Saba Gain, meaning dye. And there's a verse in the Quran saying something like the dye of God is the best dye. Fill in the gaps there, right? The baptism of God is the best baptism, of course. So anyway, so we have this question then that is open about many different SB and then blank roots, but also including just the SB root itself. And I'll explain what I mean by this, because we're today talking about the Sabians or the Sabaeans. We'll see in a second that we actually have not a consensus on how we even pronounce this word, actually, in terms of a transliteration. So the word here appears in three different verses. The two first ones are essentially the same formula. Nothing really changes. It repeats the same content. And that's these first two. So we start in Surah 262. Here we see, indeed, and this is according to Sahih International, indeed, those who believed and those who were Jews or Christians or Sabaeans before Prophet Muhammad. Ah, it's good to have those brackets there. You might get confused. Those among them who believed in Allah and the last day and did righteousness will have their reward with the Lord, and no fear among them concerning them, nor will they grieve. So becomes this very weird ecumenicalist sort of feeling, like a verse talking about how kind of like basically everyone under the sun is all right, like no worries. All you got to do basically is just sort of believe in God in the last day and do righteousness. That word itself actually means something very different, but that's for another video. Because today we're just going to talk about this whole idea of the Sabians. So it's kind of weird that in a book where it, or at least let's say, as an outsider, when you look at Islam, you're like, okay, they're very exclusivistic, right? They're very, okay, there's the land of war, that's where it's not Sharia, and so on and so forth, right? And don't be friends with those who are not, Muslim and all this, right? So it feels like weird for there to be this verse in the Quran where it feels so, everyone's on board, Barack Obama, I don't know, like just like, everyone come, right? So it's kind of strange. What do you think, JC, about these Sabians or Sabaeans?
I think that there is a very good chance that they are there, and that's not what it's meant to say. I mean, with this sentence that we have there, we have the word for Jews is an unusual one, and we are investigating. So hopefully, in the next couple of weeks or so, we will have an actual theory as to why that word is there, and it's possible that it doesn't even mean the Jews. But the main problem is the Christians. It doesn't actually say the Christians; it says the Nasara. And any Muslim will say, yeah, the Nasara are the Christians, except that that is not the term for Christians. And even to this day, people are very confused and they are trying to figure it out, that they are the Nazarenes, that they are people from Nazareth, and they followed he who was from Nazareth, but they were kind of like a bit of a weird cult. There is another term that is actually pretty much almost agreed on, which is that they are the Notzrim. So we know that this is not talking about Jews, Christians, then Sabaeans, and then there is one with the Zoroastrians, the Magians. We know that there is more to that story. And because of this root, we are thinking, okay, is it possible that this is telling a very different story and it's been mistranslated in order to have four different religions? But that's not the case. What if they were talking about different sects of heretical Christians, and these Sabians, or however you pronounce it, is actually something else? So this is kind of like what we are exploring today. That this is not as clear cut as in here the Jews are the Jews and the Christians are the Christians. We are not really sure about the Jews, and nobody knows about the Christians or the Nasara. So there is a lot more to this story, and maybe we are getting close to what these people actually believed, and the Sabians are not what we've been told in the standard Islamic narrative. That's what I think.
Yep, I would agree. And a little teaser, there's so much more going on in this verse itself than even on like you'd imagine, because a lot like basically we're going to go into this word soon enough. This word right here I'm circling, which is aladina. So, which then renders into the English as those who, right? And then, anyway, point being is we've got this verse here which feels out of place. It's very ecumenical feeling and so forth. We have this big confusion about who the Sabaeans are. In one translation here, Sahih International, they're the Sabaeans. Then in Maududi, we have the Sabians. Then Pickthall goes for the Sabaeans. So it's a group that is in the text, so presumably important. And however, the tradition totally lost how who they are, how are they supposed to be even pronounced? It's totally lost. So then who are they? Who are these Sabians or Sabaeans? What's interesting is I don't know why, but if you look at Maududi here, for example, in 262 he puts Sabians, I noticed this, and then in 569, which is another verse with basically the same formula, Maududi puts Sabaeans. So it's very confusing. Maududi just seems to at once do one and the other the other. Maybe he's trying to sort of cut it in half, make everyone happy. Regardless, so I'll read the full verse. I think I'll choose one where it's simple. Whether, okay, here. This is 262. Whether they are the ones who believe in the Arabian prophet, or whether they are Jews, Christians, or Sabians, all who believe in Allah, the last day, and do righteous deeds, their reward is surely secure with their Lord. They have no fear, nor shall they grieve. Okay, so that's the verse. We have the repeat of the same formula here. And then this other one, which is very curious also, it's the same formula in effect, with some variation also at the end of the verse, how it sort of phrases it. But in regards to this formula of those who believed and those who were Jews, this is also how they translate. They say, for example, like those who were Jews, or here you could say those who are Jews, right? So whether they were Jews or are Jews, that depends on your translation. right? It's always the same problem. So that's then this verse. But the interesting thing is that we also have the Magians, which people traditionally associate with the Magi, which I believe probably is the right association. That one people seem pretty confident in. These are the Zoroastrian priestly class types. So we have an addition to the ecumenical seeming statement. The question then becomes, okay, what are we even really looking at? Who are these Sabians? How did the Islamic narrative, the Islamic traditions, the tafsir writers, the big scholar guys, how did they talk about these Sabians? Bukhari says that they're a sect of people who used to read the Psalms, so Zabur readers. Okay, interesting. They resemble Magians, but are neither Jews nor Christians. Okay, so we define them by what they resemble and are not, right? Not really what they are, but they're kind of like Magians, right? So then Tabari says they worship angels and recite Sabur. So it's building off of Bukhari seemingly, or no, Tabari's first, right? So other way around, I guess. Um, then we have Qurtubi. He says that they're between Magians and the people of the book. They do not follow a prophet, which I'm going to show later to be false. Okay, so that's basically it. We kind of get this gist of, they're kind of like the Magians, I think. They don't have a prophet, maybe. They worship angels, potentially. And in the fullness, it's sort of like it took a form of those who worship stars, as in like these Sabians are like star worshippers. Okay, so that's kind of where they're at. They don't really know who these Sabians are, or even whether they're Sabians or Sabaeans, actually. Which is interesting. There's also a different group which is totally unrelated, who are referred to as Sabaeans. I think they're what, Northern Arabia or something like that, or were they? No, no, no. The Sabaeans, those are the ones in Yemen, right? Sabah, the Sabaean kingdom. Yes, yes, yes. The Yemeni.
Well,
Is that right?
you have some actually in Yemen, or at least you had them. Now probably they're all gone for the most part in the south. Then you had others in Iraq, if I remember correctly. And I think one of these either Sabians or Sabians, they were supposed to be attached, perhaps through the traditions, with Abraham. Even I think it was with Abraham. So the whole thing is a little bit of a mess. But to this day, we see them as there are separate religions, very very small in numbers, and just pretty much almost extinct. Back in the day, they would have been either in the south or in the north of the Arabian Peninsula, probably both.
Mm-hmm. This is the Mandaeans or the Sabaeans?
Sabaeans, Mandaeans, a little bit of
Right, but
everything.
no, no, no. But what I'm saying is, I think the Sabaeans is actually a Proto-Arabic Yemeni kingdom. So that's why, like, the pronunciation of Sabaean or Sabian, right? I've heard people associate them actually with this kingdom as well, because basically you're kind of grasping at straws. You're trying to figure out who these are. The tradition totally lost it. So
Yes,
who are
I
they?
think
So
I think you
yeah.
are right about that. I did some research on this a really long time ago, and I heard quite a few things. I think from the Christian Prince, and it was about Yemen. But then I had discussions with some people, and when I mentioned Yemen, I got the book thrown at me. So and I was told, no, 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 all of this thing was in Iraq. So just for completeness, let's say, yeah, I do think that they are in Yemen, but some people suggest that they may have been in the north. So, in one place or another, would have been in either Middle or South Arabians of the three Arabians, and certainly not in the north one. I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think necessarily all of this happened in one place. Okay, we can share.
Mhm.
All right, Yemen can share with Iraq in the glory of creating this massive cult. All right, everyone can relax. So we have this is the 262 verse. We can see in the Murad as a point of interest that he translates the Aladina Hadu as those who have Judaized. So he agrees with the translations who say that they actually, I don't think any of them say that specifically, but I've seen it before where there's some translations that say, like became Jews, right? Which is Judaizing, right? So, right, this is then the way it looks in the manuscripts. This one is going to be the Wettstein 1913, which is my favorite. I use it all the time. And you can see there's a little bit of something weird going on here. Ooh, I forgot to put the image of the other one where we see. So I will just point out essentially that in this instance, we see it spelled with this menial aleph, which would suggest that it's a two-letter consonant, a consonantal root. How do I explain this? So the Arabic Quranic language is not intended to be exhaustive, right? It's actually, this is why in its earliest forms they don't even bother putting in the rasa, or it's just this total base letter text, which is extremely efficient for speed of writing. And the reason I suggest that is not only based on the lack of diacritics and so forth, but the fact that it's an inbuilt cursive language from its baseline. And so the text is rapidly being produced, it seems. And so the function of the type of orthography used is in order for the reader to identify as quick as possible in a structured manner what the root of a word is, where a word begins, where it ends, what the root is. So the language is built primarily off three consonantal roots. That's because, in Proto-Semitic they would be like two consonantal roots, but over time, essentially, all roots in effect became three consonantal roots. In some cases, just by doubling the second consonant, things like this. So in the Quranic text, when I identify a word which has a menial aleph, right? So in this case, we have, if you see the cursor here, we have an aleph here. This is an A character in the Latin script. Then we have a lam character. This is the L character. So we have the definite article here. So that means that the word starts at this point. Okay? So that means this character is going to be the first character of our root. And because right after the first character, we have this menial aleph or middle aleph, it identifies this as actually being a two consonantal root from my experience. So we see it with instances like jar, which is using the gr root from the Hebrew, which is sojourner, foreigner, right? So the gr becomes j aleph r. It's essentially filling in space so that the reader doesn't accidentally think that something is a part of a root when it's not. Here's how it works, is that if this was, for example, a two consonantal root, and they wrote aleph, lam, sadeh, ba, and then they just continued with their suffix, the first part of their suffix could, and basically would, be confused as a third radical of a root. So in order to make it clear that this is, the word starts here, so either you have a prefix which is identifiable, because those are mims, for example, or fas or kaf, these kind of prefix or ta that function as prefixes. But in this case, we have a definite article, so you can potentially have a mim there, but there is no mim. So anyway, we can tell, okay, this is the first consonant of the root, this is filling the space, this is the second consonant of this two radical root. So that means that we're looking at basically these sort of like more older languages, looking at Hebrew primarily for two consonantal roots, because they use the biblical Aramaic, Hebrew, which has these two consonantal roots still, attested and productive. As well as the Gez. The Gez is also they have a lot more productive two consonantal roots compared to things like Aramaic and specifically the Aramaic dialect of Syriac. They pretty much don't have two consonantal roots at all. So when we're looking here at an instance of a two consonantal root, I will say again, I do have a manuscript where it's written without this aleph, which changes the dynamic completely, because then obviously and also here it does appear to my eye that there is a erasing and writing into the text going on here. So it is worth more exploration on this particular question of, was the original intent of the author to write it as this form, where you have the menial aleph to identify a two consonantal root, which would make the root of this word sadeh ba, or was it meant to be written as sadeh ba ya without the aleph, which would make the root actually sadeh ba ya, which would then mean that if we go back here, that we would now be looking actually at this sabaya root, which we see here as being Syriac for willed or desired or chosen one or voluntary, pleased. So these kind of meanings now pop up as potentialities for this. So I say that to put some ambiguity here and nuance, that we're going to go forward with the assumption for now that the original intent or the function here should be understood as a two consonantal root, while also leaving open the possibility that we actually have a three consonantal root. So in terms of just thinking right now of two consonantal root, what's very curious is the Mandaic, because so the Mandaeans are a group which they still exist today in very small number. They have sort of like a chief authority that's currently, as far as I'm aware, in dispute. So it's almost like having a, two popes kind of thing, um, or more, in fact. We have that in our history. So this Mandaic group, they use the Sade Ba root, the two consonantal root, um, for their main word for who they like for baptism, masbuta, or and so forth. So that is potentially what we're looking at here. It's definitely not from the Gez here, right, and so forth. The Hebrew has the idea of to dye or to dye stuff. There's traditions in Islam that talk about how people used to dye. I mean, not dye. People used to baptize people in like slightly yellow dyed water. But again, these are way late traditions. We don't know exactly if that's really speaking on anything necessarily. Um, that said, right, we're looking essentially, if we accept this form, at the Mandaic as being the most likely hit, as being what inspired the intention of the orthography, the original author here. So here we're seeing these masbuta. So JC, do you know much about these Mandaeans? Who are these people?
No, I researched this very, very early on, and then I moved on. I remember reading the Mandean Book of John, and it's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. Anyone who wants a hard read, please give it a shot, and then you tell me what it means. It's a very, very complicated thing. It's like half poetry, half very bizarre stuff. Oddly enough, there is a comment somewhere in that book that talks about the pillar of Satan, and that's actually why I picked up the book, because I thought that might actually have relation to the Islamic tradition of throwing stones at a pillar. But anyway, so Mandaic is the actual language, so the script. Their famous book to this day is the Mandean Book of John. They were really happy with John. I think they saw him as as their idol, and the fact that we find in the Quran this word, which happens to be Sabi, which is very much related to all of these traditions going on, we would expect the Mandeans to appear at some point or another. So even though it looks like, hang on a minute, we're looking at Sabians, but couldn't the Sabians actually be the Mandeans? If the Mandeans follow John, who is John the Baptizer, could the authors of the Quran could they have called them the baptizers or something like this? So even though they are very different words, they're actually connected through John the Baptizer. So can't remember much more about their traditions and what they do, but I know that John is the person that they really, really love.
Yep, they revere John the Baptist, which, if correct, and the Sabians are indeed the Mandaean group, then I forget who was it? Was it Tabari? I forget. The one who said that they don't follow a prophet. Either that would be a polemic against John the Baptist, potentially, or it's knowledge. I mean, or it's evidence that the author of this Tafsir was unaware of who these Sabians were, and they were making stuff up. So this group, they effectively, we can call them Baptists, which is funny, right? We have Baptists today from the Reformation, or even like quite many years after the Reformation. But maybe we were looking at some Baptists also in the 7th century Near East potentially. So this is the Mandaean group. You can see more. This is the kind of clothing that they would wear. This is their ritual garb. They actually referred to as Mandaean Sabians as well. Basically, look, kind of like under the girt, like it's just too obvious the link. But that said, maybe it's like, oh, everyone kind of acknowledges in a way or another that the Mandaeans are kind of Sabians. Maybe that's just smokes and mirrors again. But the root, all of it lines up for this identification to actually be plausible. So even here, I'm sure it's actually quite small and hard to read, but we see in the Arabic here for al-sabi'a, right? There's a hamza there as well, which we should actually not even consider, right? But anyway, so alif lam sad alif ba. So we have the same form where you have the alif taking the place of the second consonant of the root, potentially, and therefore this identification is even stronger. But yeah, to talk about some details, I guess they have very unique rituals. You can find videos on YouTube of what they do. There's also a certain like a item that they have stuck in the ground, and one of the videos I saw looks kind of like a cross, which I found interesting. So there's all kinds of stuff you can look at there. They performed ritual baptisms, but they didn't consider it like a one-time thing, right? Like we would say in Christianity, I confess, one baptism for the remission of sins. It's very clear. Okay, we're not baptizers. We don't baptize all day, um, which is the case of what they do, right? This is a group that performs baptism almost in a sort of more old school Jewish way, where they would do it as a ritual to cleanse the soul, cleanse the body, clean themselves up, all that kind of stuff. So,
Oh, now that you mentioned that, can't remember, Cash, if we discussed. I saw a long time ago a video from the Christian Prince. It was a short one, something like 10 minutes long, and he was saying that the voodoo that they do, the cleansing that they do in Islam, is actually the one from the Sabians. Like he says, look, they copied. These people have been doing this for like a really long time before Islam, and I think he had a video where they actually show these people doing the cleansing in the same manner, or pretty much the same manner as Muslims do today. And of course, any Muslim would say, well, they copied from us. The Christian Prince certainly put forward that no, Islam copied from them, or maybe actually they were the proto-Muslims. So maybe something to consider. I wonder if have you ever watched that video, or heard that argument?
I think I may have watched that video. I definitely heard the argument before, and it's definitely correct. I've came to the same conclusion. Well, not definitely correct. It's probably correct. I came to the exact same conclusion. Because, like you said, the similarities just mount up. And yeah, this voodoo, this ritual washing comes from somewhere, right? So you have to explain the purpose of it, which of course the real answer is that it came way before the Mandaeans because Allah gave this voodoo to Adam, the first prophet, and so forth, right? But no, actually not. This originates in a Baptist tradition, which emerges as a sect of Christianity, just like the modern day Baptists emerged as a sect of Christianity. It's not really that much different. History doesn't really, it doesn't repeat necessarily, but it rhymes. So I would put forward we had a religious reformation, which is also the word that we looked at in the beginning very briefly and discussed. This word that says do righteous deeds, which appears very often in the formula where it says those who believed in Allah and the last day and what was it? I forget the root, but and do righteous deeds. This root, I looked into it, it has meanings of advance, succeed, prosperity, right? So what comes to mind is prosperity gospel, stuff like this, and also reform, right? So I there was a lot of, tension, apocalypse stuff was going on around this time. It was a very fickle time. A lot of different cultures were mixing together because it's in the whole post kind of revolt against the Sassanids. All these different communities banded together for a common enemy, and then they have to now live amongst each other. So there's all these different religious traditions in conjunction. People are most likely coming into contact and using different canons. They're some of them potentially using Gospel of Thomas and things like this, right? So there was a lot of zeitgeist for, give us the truth. What's the truth? There's so much options here. We don't know what the truth is. We need a pope. I'm sure that they were calling out kind of like deep down in their subconscious. We need a pope. We need an ultimate authority in this. And that's where we got the idea of a caliph, probably. But yes, so we're looking here at this word also, just as another point of interest, that in their book, so this is Johannesbuch, which just means Book of John. This is, I guess, the author here was a German, maybe. And Abba Saba Zakaria, so this is, of course, in the Sabbaic or Mandaic traditions, they actually really do talk about Zechariah a lot and talk about him as Abba Saba, which means either something like father of baptism or like father of the father Baptist, something along those lines, right? I don't fully know. But anyway, so the mention of Zechariah makes some sense of why Zechariah plays a elevated role in the Quranic text because Christian tradition, right? We know a little bit about Zechariah. We know he's the father of John. We know he was a righteous man. We know that John's birth was a miracle because he was quite old, right? So we know some things about Zechariah, but to flesh out the story of Zechariah to the extent the Quran does, it would make sense for there to be an antecedent to that, which may be what we see here in these Mandaic sources, which talk about the Saba the abasaba, right? So this root appears here as well. This is how the Mandaic sources use this kind of phrasing. So the root can be built then into the person who does baptism, which then uses the mim prefix. So like Muhammad is the one who is desired. Then ma, spana, is different because ma means the one who does. And also it's a different language necessarily, so the grammar is a bit different. But anyway, so in the Aramaic, masbana, then in the Mandaic here, means the baptizer. So we see that as well in other instances. And what's quite interesting is that the Mandaic community collectively refer to themselves as Sabiya, or Suba here as well, potentially as like a, right, but no, but that's the Arabic. But Sabiya, right? All right, so then we see here, back to the manuscript here, and also this word again about the usage and how it renders. So the baseline would be to immerse or to baptize. Then we would have the form of masbana, one who is the baptizer, the one who baptizes. And then the sabiya, right, which we can see then is written here. Sadeba is, I don't know what shape that, I don't read Mandaic, but I would assume it would be an H maybe? I don't know. If it is an H, that would be very interesting because it would resemble the same marbuta shape as the Arabic does. I also want to point out, I just noticed this today when I was looking at these script forms, the Sade in the cursive script of the Mandaic looks very, very, very similar to the Sade in the cursive Arabic script, which I found very interesting. So then, JC, do you want to take this? This is this hadith in the traditions. You probably know more about how the hadiths speak about the Sabians and such.
This one is just almost like a passing comment in a number of hadiths. If anyone wants to actually find that word, all you have to do is go to sunnah.com and type in sabi, as Kash has done here, and then you will see how this is actually showing in this manner. And I can't remember what this hadith is actually talking about. I think, one of the Sahaba, one of the companions of the Prophet, if I remember correctly, and they end up calling to that guy. So I don't think that is supposed to be Muhammad, where they said to Allah's messenger. Oh no! So they are actually saying this. There is another hadith that is they are saying this to a member of the Sahaba. So this one is saying someone calling Muhammad, is this the Sabi? So obviously there is a problem when you check what Sabi means in the Islamic traditions. They're going to say something different. They are going to actually send you completely and utterly away from the root of baptism, because the same reason why the Quran no longer reads baptism in the cases of John and Jesus. The same is here. But these hadiths, even though they are actually very late, they are they record people calling Muhammad a sabi, a sabian, what, a baptizer. That is actually the root, and as Kash has it right there highlighted, it is exactly the same root as well. So it looks like at the very beginning of the whole thing, there was this strong influence from people who seem to have the word baptism as a very basic thing and important in their traditions. Otherwise, they wouldn't call someone Sabi. It would be the defining factor of their beliefs. And so far, is pointing quite strongly towards some form of baptism, which is interesting.
And it would make a lot of sense in the context of this hadith. I will admit I did not read, it's a very big hadith, so I didn't read the entire hadith. But this is the final section, comes right at the end, and it essentially is like, they said to Allah's messenger, she said, "Do you mean the one who is called a Sabi?" And they put in brackets, "with a new religion," because the Islamic traditions, they highlight this explanation that Sabi refers to someone who is bringing a new religion. If you ask them, okay, tell me, based on Semitic etymology, which root did you derive that from? Right? Crickets, crickets, crickets. It's just made up, basically. So, yeah, they replied, "Yes, the very same person, so come along." This is a story that would probably come from a tradition that is actually talking about Jesus. Why? Well, because Jesus was a baptizer. He was going around baptizing people, so they would have referred to him as a Sabi, for example. And also this image of like, yes, the very same person, so come along. You have this dynamic as well in the early times when, Christ comes into contact with the apostles, right? This sort of buzzing. And yeah, so I would put forward that this memory that we have here, right? It doesn't say even Muhammad, even though Muhammad would also refer to Jesus, but it uses Rasulallah. So you can see kind of this spirit of Abd al-Malik as well, where this focus on Rasulallah theology is also playing a role here. Probably it's all over the Hadith, obviously, and the modern Islamic reading is simply to read it as, oh yeah, it's a title, I guess, for Muhammad because he was a messenger for Allah, just like the 200 some thousand other prophets before him, I suppose. But the thing is that the term Rasul Allah is actually the term Malak Yahweh. And this Malak Yahweh term isn't just anyone. It isn't just any angel or whatever. It is specifically the angel of the Lord, Malak Yahweh, right? So this is identifying someone who is divine, and he's called, it seems like a Baptist or baptizer or something like this. So who would
Uh,
that fit? Yes, the Rasulallah who is also a Baptist is Jesus, right? So yeah.
Yeah. And if I may, let me actually just try to put, can you just go back to the previous slide with this one with
Hmm.
the hadith, which is really nice. So just to put this thing again in a almost timeline order. So we already discussed on the channel the problems with the name Muhammad or Mahmad, and anyone who is familiar with the works of J. Smith will be very familiar with that argument. So we've discussed that one as well on the channel. So if you haven't watched that, make sure that you do. We go through the 4 verses where Mahmad appears and how they are mistranslated and all of that. So we have Mahmad, who was originally in the Quran because it was about Jesus. It was just another title for Jesus. So, okay, we have that. Then we look at the Quran and we find next to John and next to Jesus this word Sabi, which seems to be baptism. And when we think about the fact that we never call John John, we call him always John the Baptizer. If there is a place in the Quran where that word is hidden, is next to him. And lo and behold, there we have it. It happens to be that very exact root. And in Surah 19, it just fits. And then when we look at the hadiths, they're talking about Mahmad. They still have this memory of who the original character was. And the original character in their traditions, when everything began, was Jesus. Then, of course, they added a lot of different mythology, and probably they added stories of other people, such as Umar, Ali, Marwan the First, Abdul Malik, and all of those people. So they obviously create a lot. But still, through the hadiths, they have this one here calling the messenger of Allah Sabi. Now, that would not make any sense if we are thinking about it from the standard Islamic narrative point of view. But if we see what they have been doing with the Quran and how they have actually hidden this word in plain sight next to John, next to Jesus, when we look at this hadith, we start to understand okay, Muhammad is Jesus, therefore, here, someone addressing the messenger of God as Sabi, that would have to be, well, it could potentially be John, but based on all of the hadiths, is probably the memories that they had about Jesus, people actually addressing him. So we see how those stories that they knew about Jesus, they actually become part of the Muhammad mythos. And when we just dig a little bit, we see how it doesn't make sense with the interpretation that we now have and the understanding of the Muhammad of the standard Islamic narrative. But when we take those words and we put them together with Jesus, they actually make sense. And we can start to unpick how the traditions were actually built and what sort of memories people who were writing these traditions actually remembered. They had these traditions from some place. Some of them that would have been the warlords, but some of these traditions they came directly from the source, which was Jesus. Hence why, as well, Muslims to this day believe that Jesus comes back on the day of judgment. They didn't change that and said, no, it's Muhammad who returns. They were stuck with Jesus because that had been there for a really long time. So I hope that explains it a little bit how we're actually connecting the verses in the Quran with the Hadith, with the Sabians, Mandians, and so on, and how it all fits together. Hopefully, or maybe not.
Maybe not. Well, no, I think this one's pretty. I mean, come on. It's just there's too much here it's probably referring to Sabian, but maybe that's actually a ruse, right? It's meant to be like too obvious because it's something entirely different. I wouldn't put it past the realm of possibilities. However, I believe that when it talks about Sabians, it's talking about literally Baptists. And although they're not one to one like the British Baptist, or the from Netherlands, I think that that's where they started, right? It wouldn't be exactly the same, but the idea is kind of similar. It's the idea that, um, let's say the church authority, you have a disagreement about something potentially, or some other thing, and or something as extreme as forming a whole new religion where you're worshiping John the Baptist as being the true ultimate prophet. In fact, I can tell a little bit about Mandaeanism, or whatever, right? So they believe that John the Baptist was betrayed by Jesus, and in their scriptures they even have like a whole, part of the book where they have Jesus speaking with John the Baptist, and it's like a very like, almost like the Quran. Did you take your mother and me as your Lord? Almost like the same vibe. And so yeah, they don't like Jesus. Instead, they like John the Baptist. So this is a quite a radical thing. But that said, at the time when these Mandaeans, what became Mandaeans, at the time when they popped up and were referred to as Sabi, hypothetically, right? It's not necessarily the case that what we know today in history, looking back, like, oh, okay, Mandaeans or this, and we can see, it's not necessarily the case that at the very beginning of their reform movement, that they were immediately wait 1 second, sorry, that they were immediately had all these beliefs, right, and so forth, right. But yeah, so I would put forward what we have here, of course, is we have a time machine, and the founders of the Baptist movement are shocked to find out that we have Baptists in the Near East in the 7th century. Whoa! People say, Islam needs a reformation. I think what happened is actually that Islam is the result of a reformation. What do you think, JC?
Yeah, that perhaps is not as extreme as you make it sound just by saying, like they had a reformation. No, it's something that happens. And based on all the information that we have about what happened in the 7th century, and then how it evolved through the Umayyads, and then almost immediately after the Abbasids, and how they changed absolutely everything. That's what happened. But I know that it sounds like an incredibly challenging thought, but as we keep digging, we will actually find more and more stuff. The comments that we are getting from the videos are actually really good. People are pointing us towards different words, different historical aspects, and everybody seems to slowly be getting involved into, okay, this is a huge jigsaw puzzle. Let's actually all bring all of the knowledge together and just figure it out. Now, I'm very well aware that the topic today is the unpopular opinion, is something new. We have always seen these verses that talk about the Jews, the Christians, the Sabians, and the Magians, and we say, well, that's it. We don't need to look at that any further because we know who they are. But it's only when you actually step into the text a little bit and you see that the Jews, they are not called Yahudis. It's actually written um, Hadu. It's just Hadu. That's the word. So it's like, okay, so maybe we need to look into that one with more detail, in more detail. And then you have the Nasara. Nobody knows the Nasara. And it's like, but then why do we conclude that the Sabians um, and the Magians, the Zoroastrians, would be so important as to make it into a text that is very clearly Trinitarian and very much about the Abrahamic faith? And then those people happen to be they say they will have nothing to fear, nor shall they grieve. And it's like, really, really. So this is what the early Muslims said, that the Sabians and the Magians, completely different religions, they were halal. Absolutely not. Now, when we look into it and we see that maybe Nasara happens to be the North Stream, and that is a bit of a sub-cult or sect of heretical Christianity, what about if Sapiens is the same? And is just talking about a different group, which is the baptizers. So imagine that this text is saying something like Hadu, we still have to unpick that one, and Magians as well. But if now we have the Nord Stream and we have the baptizers, all of a sudden we realize that it is very likely that this is saying different cults of Christianity, they are fine, they will still, they will have nothing to fear, nor shall they grieve. and it has nothing to do with 4 religions, but with 4 cults, perhaps just 3.
Yeah, the assumption, well, this Hadu word, like you said, the reason why they translated all these different ways, like became Jews or were Jews or Judaized and this and that, is because this isn't even the proper word for Jews, even according to the standard Islamic narrative, right? Because that word would be Yahud, right? That's what they say today. You'll hear that a lot in Gaza, for example. This word itself, the Yahud, it could be, of course, the way to properly refer to Jews as such. It's totally feasible, right? Because potentially Yahud would refer to Judah, and it would be like the spirit of Judas, and therefore it would be the Jews who reject Messiah, and that would make sense of the fact that then the Notzrim or the Nasara, right? That this group would then be the Jews who do accept Messiah, which is then why you see that the Yahud and the Nasara are often mentioned, in conjunction with each other, almost like they have a lot more in common than they have separate, that being potentially an ethnic similarity, where you have the Jews who deny Messiah and those who accept Messiah, those being then the Nasara. But the question then becomes, okay, if these Nasara are this Jewish Christian group, which I've spoken of before, which are what I call incarnation deniers. So they believe in the Christ Messiah spirit. They believe that Jesus had within him this Christ spirit. So they abstract away the divinity effectively from Jesus while still saying that they accept him. Sounds very much like what modern Muslims engage in terms of rhetoric. So that's what they would see this whole situation as. So they were not Christians, right? So it's improper for the whole Islamic world to read this text and think that the Nasara are like, the classic everyday person who goes to a classic, Catholic, Orthodox, whatever church. These are not Christians. So then the question then becomes, okay, this is a massive textual tradition, and what they say refers to Christians as Nasara. And if Nasara does not refer to Christians, but rather refers to Jews who accept Messiah, then where are the Christians? Surely they're just like, they are relevant enough to at least get a mention, right? So why is the text silent on the whole category of Christians? It's not possible that they weren't familiar with Christians, right? So what I would put forward is probably that, Christian really just as a category to mean a proper follower of Christ. So if the textual tradition, the authors, they conceptualize themselves as the proper followers of Christ, they would have considered themselves the proper Christians. Also, actually, we'll leave it there. So what we have here is then this big question mark of, okay, so is what I put forward the real explanation? That the reason why Christians are not mentioned at all is because the authors consider themselves Christian, and then the reason why then it gets fixed later by pretending that a Jewish Christian heretical sect in the eyes of the Catholic and broader church are actually the Christians. And that's how it's then read today, which it never was intended as. So that's the whole Nasara, Nazareans, Notzrim, like you said, which appear in the Talmud. They're spoken of. They appear in history. They appear in inscriptions in the Arabian Peninsula, so on and so forth. We know who these people are. The church fathers spoke about them. In fact, we have, records not surviving, as in it's not a surviving manuscript, but we know of the Gospel according to the Hebrews, also known as the Gospel according to the Nazareans, or the Gospel according to the Ebionites. It's not totally sure if these are all the same thing, or there is one church father says that the Ebionite Gospel, I think this is in like the 4th century, or maybe the 3rd, 4th, something like that century, maybe even 5th century, that the Ebionites have a corrupted version of what the Nazareans had. So there's all this messy stuff going on with these Jewish Christian sects that are appearing, right, and retaining over time. So that's what we're looking at here. These Nasara, these Sabians, and so forth. None of them are Christians as such, right? Proper Christians are not. Actually, no. When they talk about mushrik, that's what what we would say is proper Christians, because they do not like the mixing of the human and divine natures. They're not very big fans of that. Anyway, so we'll leave it at that. I'll tease that this word will eventually become a big topic. Aladdin, because it looks like Aladdin. Oh. Anyway, I'll leave it at that, JC.
Yeah, there is a lot actually that we could actually tease, and even with some of the verses that we've seen today, there are words that we are really digging into. And if we are right about this Sabian root, then this Hadur would mean something else, and we will get there. But for now, and actually, just before we let you all go, remember we've actually uploaded an outro, so please stay until it plays out. Let us know if it's all right at your end, if you like it, if you don't like it. And also a reminder, so we will be back on Monday, and we're going to do something a little bit different on Monday. Normally we just talk about the Quran, and that's all. However, we've noticed that there is this little feud happening between Jay Smith and Raymond Ibrahim, two scholars that we actually really like, and they are very different. So we are going to have a little conversation about that, and I'm not going to spoil on which camp we are on, although anyone who has watched any of our videos already know. But we will try to put a few new elements on the table that will help one of the two, either Raymond Ibrahim or Jay Smith. So make sure that you actually tune in on Monday and see what things we're actually putting together and what we can possibly do to elevate the claims of at least one of them. So hopefully that will be a fun stream. And but for now, this one has been all about Sabians. Let us know what you think about this. If you have liked this, what your thoughts are. If you actually understand the difference between the Mandians and the Sabians, and you want to actually give us a lecture, make sure that you actually drop that on the comment section so that we become a little bit more educated about these very ancient groups of people that seem to be important in the creation of the Quran to, more or less, more or a lesser degree, they were important, at least in the traditions. So, but anyway, more will come soon. And like Kash said, there will be other words that seem to be incredibly important, and they seem to be as well hidden, just um, like Sabi or baptism or crucifixion or resurrection, or those very fun words that you would expect to find in a very Trinitarian book where Jesus is called the Messiah. So stay tuned for that. And Cash, so I think we are now just under 1 hour. So if you'd like to say some final words before we play the outro and see what happens.
I'm I'm would like to say a message of encouragement in the sense that this is a gradual process. It takes time. However, I'm now gradually like it's now dominoes are falling. Basically, that in the beginning it felt like I think JC you said it earlier today. It felt like we were just sort of punching and at the Quran, and then the Quran would beat us up, right? And then we would come back again, having learned our lesson, had our our bumps, right? And then return with new gear or whatnot, and all of a sudden, wow, these monsters are no longer that difficult. Their name is no longer red. They're lower level now, and so forth, right? So at this point, the dominoes are falling very, very quickly. I'm getting through verses like butter, right? And it's more glorious than you could possibly imagine. It's not just like this kind of like imagination corruption that we could have, and like that that word was changed from this to this, and it maybe changes some localized meaning or whatever. It's not, it's so much beyond that. It's to the point where you have entire sentences which mean a totally different thing than what we're reading. In fact, the verse that comes to mind is actually the verse we're talking about in this live stream today. We're just not going into it, but that is one of these verses which, guys, it says something entirely different from this ecumenical claim. So enough teasing. I'll leave that as my last words. Thank you all for paying attention, and we would love as many comments to engage with the material and such. We'll reply to as many or all of them because we don't have that many comments. But yeah, so thank you all for watching, and we'll see you guys then on Monday.
Right. So same from me. Thank you very much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this show. Stay tuned for the next one, and God bless you all. See you all next week. Bye bye.
There is only one Quran, right? Every Quran in the world is the same. That's what you've been told. You have been told a lie!
There are approximately 26 of the Quran.
26 different Quran!
More than
There are 0 Dawa guys apparently left on the planet who are willing to defend Muhammad in a debate.
Everybody can go and read it. This is a book full of mistakes in Arabic, in the grammar, in the spelling, in the pronunciation.
Whoever wrote the Quran made an error because they didn't quite understand what was written in the 7th century in the Torah and the Injil.
As promised, I will give you more than 20 reasons why I left Islam in this video.
We know that stories about Muhammad were made up on an industrial scale.
What in the world is this Injil?